Leeds, Leeds, Leeds. What is happening? Welcome to Working Hours, a show about a place called Leeds, a time called now, and an activity called work. Working Hours wants to record 1,000 loiners over the course of this, the most important decade in the history of the human species, and ask them what they do all day and hear how they feel about it. My name is Simon, and this is all my fault. What did you want to be when you grew up?
Well, depends on what day it was, largely. Either in a band or a writer. So I've been in bands, and I made my living as a writer for the better part of 30 years. So I'd say I've managed to do what I originally hoped.
So,
Never made a living from my music, but that's okay. I wasn't good enough, so it worked out just fine as it was.
So did you get paid for it, but you just didn't make enough money out of it, or?
This was when I was living in the States, in Cincinnati at that time. And we were in a bar band, so we played Thursdays and occasional weekend gigs and stuff like that. And mix of some covers, our own material. But no, never going to be enough to make a living from it. That doesn't happen in a place like Cincinnati. So. And even when I moved out to Seattle, and I got there about the time a little bit before the whole sort of, grunge thing took off. I was playing in a small band and in bars and stuff, but again, had a regular day job and wasn't even thinking at that point of trying to make a living from it. I kind of given up on that bit by then.
You're listening to Series 3, Episode 15, and to my guest, Chris Nickson. This is another Zoom interview recorded on the 17th of May, 2022. Hello, loves. The UK should not extradite Julian Assange. Just needed to put that out there. If you give a damn about a free press and free speech, then you'd be wise to care about this matter. But we're 21st century humans, aren't we? Nothing really matters, does it? At least that's what the zeitgeist tells us. We're going to be hitting 50 published episodes soon, so I'm probably going to do something to mark that. I want to change up the static outro for a start. I'll talk about this more as we get closer to that 50th episode. I use Zoom for these interviews. It's a work tool now. It fits for this show, I think. It also glitches. There are glitches in parts of the interviews, in parts of this interview. It's a free show. If and when the show can pay for itself, I'll probably start to let myself feel bad about things like glitches, but at the moment, I have way more shit to worry about. Yes, I'm also banging the mic. I know, I'm sorry. I'm sorting out a shock mount. That's right, I'm going to waffle for a bit this week. If you're new here, welcome. I don't always start like this, and the next intros will probably be back to normal. If you want to get straight into the show, then skip forward about 6 minutes. Before I start eulogizing civilization and then introduce this week's guest, I also want to give a content warning that there's some discussion of fictional childhood abuse in this interview. Nothing too graphic, but I felt it was worth mentioning here. I don't have time codes on the shows yet, so if you're in any doubt, then please don't listen and go through some of my back episodes instead. At some point, there will be time codes on these. If you're still here, please stay with me and my mad mind, and we'll be back with my guest in 2 shakes of a lamb's tail, as they say. People are people, and the only groups of people we should meticulously scrutinize, watch, and criticize are the rich and the powerful, and the systems of control and enrichment that benefit them at the expense of our lives, literally, at the expense of our actual life expectancy and standards of living. Our falling pay and purchasing power, over 10 years of cuts and more than a dozen years of money printing, nearly 20 years of bombing the global south, all while increasing atmospheric CO2 to over 420 parts per million. We are all part of this problem, but we can't address any of it until they do. It's a fucking nightmare. Please remember, everyone is a person, and persons are people, and people are people. Corporations, governments, and institutions are not people. People don't live for centuries, nor should they. A person isn't that powerful. A position might be. But then corporations and governments aren't anything without people. Just like there are no jobs on a dead planet, there's no institutions without people. To fix everything, we need everyone. If your circle of concern can't stretch that far, don't worry. It doesn't need to. Don't try to love the world, love where you live, because that's the part of the world that you can actively make better, and it's somewhere that you can see the results of your work. Don't go abroad to build a playground, build it here. And don't close yourself to strangers. Welcome them in. You don't need me to tell you this shit, but it does need saying much more and much louder in our venal, psychotic, nihilistic, and extinction-oriented media spaces. We have a vicious Etonian media and a vicious and callous Etonian establishment in London. As far as I'm concerned, they've killed over 100,000 of us through austerity and nearly another 200,000 of us with COVID. Believe that the state is the biggest threat to your life and realize that the second biggest threat to your life is its ongoing collapse. I've mentioned collapse a few times because that's what I see and experience, but it often looks to me like no one is dealing with reality. I'm not going to sugarcoat or be gentle when I mention collapse. You can't avoid it. It's not in the future. It's now. Everyone in media seems to believe in the power of make-believe, that if we just hope something improves, then it will. That if we create an office and a worker for it, someone to put out a press release, then all our problems will be fixed by that press release. If we give a multi-million or billion-pound contract to our mates, then it's fixed. If it makes someone money, then it's fixed. After all, the news cycle will just move on. So it's not like anything real needs to be done, ever, does it? Nothing will be fixed. Next year will be worse. Every year now will be worse. You know this from the last decade, from the last 2 years, from the 90s, from this century. This is the coldest summer of the rest of your rapidly shortening life. I know, and I'm sorry. I won't always bring this up, but the real situation is too crazy, too dire, and too invisible. We should all be talking about it every day and not spending energy pretending to look happy for social media. I'm sick of hearing people in media and in reality talking about a future without mentioning this minor extinction-level threat/event that is ongoing now and speeding up. Oh, the future is going to be whatever, is it? Where's the land, food, water, energy and labour going to come from when it's all dead? Climate change has displaced nearly 5 million people this year in one area alone. The amount of energy returned from 1 barrel's worth of oil spent on getting oil out of the ground has gone from about 100 barrels worth in the early years of the 20th century to 1 barrel giving us about 10 barrels worth now. We're hitting the sort of temperatures that literally cook human beings now, this year, all over the world. This is a cool La Nina year. Are we looking mindlessly forward to a scorcher for ourselves and our socials again, or are we getting savvier than that? We're not. I have a friend from Australia over during the next few weeks. I will likely never see him again in person after he goes back this time. Either flying will not be happening, or it will be too expensive, and or even just too dangerous. If politics doesn't stop flying very soon, then reality will. Melting runways and so forth. Routes are being squeezed. Prices will keep going up as small operators keep going to the wall, and the big ones just can't read the writing on that wall until it's too late and they're gone too. All this good stuff we have made for ourselves. We need sustainable transport that is affordable to all. We need the people who work on it to be well trained, well treated, respected and well paid so that it's safe and accessible to all of us. We need it to not run on any fossil fuels. We need to turn off our distance shrinking devices and start mutually helping our actual real-life neighbours to help us cope with trying to survive our failing and flailing systems. I need to start working in real life on real, practical, material ways to survive the collapse of this order. If that's even going to be remotely possible to do before we're all cooked in our homes while still drilling for more dead fossil material to heat our planet, boil our oceans, burn away our forests and our oxygen, and kill off all our agricultural crops and livestock. Modern socially controlled mass populations are stupid. I have yet to see any evidence to counter this empirical observation. We need to turn off the trending news wherever we can. It no longer informs. It can't. It is only clickbait now. But don't think about it. It will all go away if you don't think about it. have another pint, go for another jog, post another inspirational quote, or sit and cry about it. What else can we do? God damn it, the 21st century is the worst. On a positive note, I think that this is a great episode and that it's also somewhat timely given the growing strike wave happening here and now. If you're in a union that is or that is about to take industrial action, then I'd love to hear from you for the podcast. If you're a full-time official in Leeds, I'd love to hear from you. If you have a job you don't like, come on the podcast. We can't all enjoy our work and be able to do something we want or don't mind to do. How bad is it? Are you using the growing network of food banks in this supposedly developed country? Remember, you can appear on the show anonymously if you'd like. Right then, let's crack on with the episode. Chris Nickson is an author and former journalist. At 21, he moved to the US and spent the next 30 years there, returning to England in 2005, and finally full circle to Leeds. He's made a living as a writer since 1994, initially as a music journalist, specialising in world and roots music. His first novel, The Broken Token, came out in 2010, featuring Richard Nottingham, Constable of Leeds in the 1730s. There was a real Richard of Nottingham, and that was his post, although it was probably largely ceremonial. The audio version of The Broken Token was one of the Independent on Sundays audiobooks of the year. We talk about Chris's books and his research into the history of Leeds and the importance of the labour movement in our history. You can find out more about Chris at chrisnickson.co.uk. Like, share, follow and subscribe to this podcast. It doesn't self-generate and appear freely from nowhere. It takes a lot of time to make one of these episodes. I've costed them at about 300 quid each to make, and that's on a low rate of pay. So I really am doing all I can to bring this to you. So if you do like anything at all about it, if you get what I'm trying to do with this show, then please follow and promote Working Hours all around Leeds and on and off social wherever you can, whenever you remember to. Please give money to this show and please give me any feedback, questions or comments that you may have. Email workinghourspod@western-studios.com or use one of my social channels to get in touch. Links for all of those social channels are at the end of this episode. Please share and mention Working Hours everywhere and engage with the show in any way you can. Please get in touch to advertise your Leeds business, campaign, show, event, whatever. If you like anything about this show, please support me in making it however you can. Thank you in advance for your cooperation in this matter, and apologies for the tardiness of this episode. And now please enjoy the totally free and totally ad-free, as far as I know, episode of Working Hours with author Chris Nickson. So what are you doing now?
These days, virtually all I do is work as a novelist. Occasional album reviews for a website and occasional press releases for labels or artists. The magazines I used to write for, and I made a living as a music journalist for quite a while, have all fallen by the wayside because it wasn't mainstream rock music that I was dealing with. It was roots and world music, which is out on the margins. And I was lucky to be able to publish so much about it for so long. But the economy took care of that.
So was that a print sort of death of print media thing, or was that more just the way that the market moved? The market became less interested?
A mix of both things, actually. The death of print media was probably a large factor, because when you can't make the money you need to keep a magazine going, what's the point? And within that field, there's one magazine that keeps going, but I'm not quite sure how. So anyway, it's fine. Things move on, and I'm happy focusing very largely on fiction these days.
Not really sure where to start with this, of what to explore. I mean, I'll start then with my COVID question. So the question is largely about whether COVID has changed your work or the way that you work, or affected it in some way. But I like to go back to sort of your experience of the lockdown and going into it and see that immediate change, like how it affected your working sort of day to day, whether you were doing more or less. Can you take us through your experience of the lockdown, like where you were and what you were doing work-wise?
We were here and I was doing what I always do, which is write.
Mm-hmm.
So in that regard, I've worked from home since 1994.
Mm-hmm.
How did it affect me? In that regard, very little.
Mm.
Quite honestly, I loved lockdown.
Mm.
I'm not a social person, so that quietness, that sense of isolation worked for me. I could get out to my allotment, work there. We could get out for walks locally. So in many ways, it had no effect at all on the way I live and work. I was working exactly the same as normal.
Yeah.
And
you didn't throw yourself into it more because it's kind of take your mind off the news or anything like that?
No, I didn't. I mean, the news was horrifying, and there's that constant sense of back then of, if I get this, I'm going to die. But I suppose I'm no different from a lot of other people in that, particularly people who are older, like myself. My contacts with people for quite a while have largely been online.
Yeah.
So again, there was no change there at all.
Yeah.
And I was happy going out into the silence.
Yeah. And the space.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I could do the stuff I wanted to do. I had this wonderful thing of once a week, get down and queue outside Tesco with my mask on and do the shopping for both of us. But that was about it. I mean, I'm one of those curious people who actually enjoyed lockdown. And I make no apology for that, because it's who I am. It suited me perfectly.
I mean, I think a lot of people, there was a lot, the quietness and, having that space to move around, quiet roads, quieter parks. And when it was nice, busy, but not too busy because people are keeping space from each other and, people are going out a limited amount. And kind of, I've had discussions during this where we've talked about, like that sense of on a Sunday when everything was shut, or at Christmas when everything was shut.
Yeah.
It was just like, you had to, it's just everything shut. You just have to do something else.
Yeah. And I live technically in a park. So walked to the end of my drive and it was largely empty, and it was great. But that said, it was nice to see the life come back to it as well, because it is, after all, a park for the people, and it's good to see the people able to use it again.
Yeah. Well, that's it. You wouldn't want to go back into lockdown necessarily. Well, I wouldn't want to go back into lockdown necessarily, but I do think, there were good elements to it, and there were good things that we could take from it. And, maybe having something like that, where you have a space of time, like even a remembrance of the lockdown, where you just have a day where it's like everything's closed for a day, and,
Yeah, I mean, something akin to the armistice celebration in a way, because it'd be a good way to remember all the people who did die. And there were, let's face it, there were an awful lot of them. And globally, we're never going to know how many. I mean, the estimate for the Spanish flu, which is the nearest analogy we're likely to come up with, was 50 million worldwide. We're not going to touch anywhere near that, largely because we were able to develop a vaccine or multiple vaccines. But it's still huge, huge numbers. I know people who lost husbands, wives, partners, parents, and it will give them that recognition for grievance, for grieving.
Yeah, because we've kind of gone into it like forgotten about its space now, haven't we? Because it was, it was a big event that affected a lot of people, and we're kind of not necessarily processing it yet. And it's sort of, no, we're not thinking about it now. It's over. It's done. Yeah.
But it's not.
No. I want to go back to, because I want to explore, obviously I've got to talk to you about going to the US and that experience. So what made you move? What took you over there? Was it a band? Was it just like, I've got to see America? What was it?
American, actually.
Oh, okay.
We started off as pen pals, but we were still at school. I went on to uni for a year and left. She went on to college over there for a year and a bit and left. At that point, I moved back to Leeds. I was living with my parents and I was working at St. James's Hospital. And I got a letter saying, I'm coming over to visit, just sort of out of the blue. So she arrived. 3 days later, we decided to get married. To be fair, we were 19 at the time. Okay? So 19 and this pair of basically slightly latter-day hippies. She went home for 6 weeks, came back over, during which time I got us a flat and this and that. I worked for the NHS, she worked for Leeds Libraries. Good jobs, good prospects. We tried to get a mortgage, but we couldn't, although we had money in the bank. For our first anniversary, her parents gave us a trip over there. And this was 1975. And England was not in the best state at that time, economically, in most every way. America was this revelation. It's a bit of a cliche, but it's like moving from black and white to color. And it was a place where everything did seem possible. So she realized she was homesick. So we decided to move over there. And it took about 6 months, I think, to get my green card. And that's what we did. Settled in Cincinnati, where she was from. And that was that.
But could you...
Except there's a code to that.
Yeah.
We did get divorced a few years later. And eventually, thanks to the magic of the internet, we found each other again on Facebook. She married again, had a daughter. I married again, had a son, and I was divorced again. 2 years ago in the summer, her daughter messaged me and said her mother was in hospital and not expected to live. Then I got the message the next day she died. She had what they call a brain bleed. So it was pretty sudden. And it definitely hit me for a loop, much more than I would have expected. So that's the coda to that story.
I was going to ask about the experience of sort of, when you initially landed going into work, like, could you work straight away or did you have to wait for the green card? Did you get sponsored?
Well, I had the green card before I had to have the green card to be admitted.
Yeah.
Because I was not a tourist. So after that, I was free to find a job, which I did. I've been working in hospitals over here. I found hospital work over there. And this being the Midwest, if you live out in the suburbs, there are no bus services. So you learn to drive and you learn quick and you get a car. So suddenly I'm doing all this, and a couple of months after we arrived, I'm driving up Interstate 75. I have a Mustang 2, which is not the classic Mustang, but still not bad. My leather jacket's on the back seat. Springsteen's Born to Run comes on the radio, and suddenly I'm thinking, yeah, I'm in America now. So that was perhaps the the quintessential early American experience for me.
Did you have long flowing locks at this point as well?
Not that long.
No, you didn't go for the long haired. I suppose it wasn't that fashionable then, maybe.
It was still fashionable over there, but mine would never grow that long without curling up at the ends. So
yeah.
I never had the chance to do that and look cool, I'm afraid. Out of the question.
So how did you get the first sort of gig writing then? Like, did you just found a magazine?
Well,
or you just writing?
Well, I did a little bit in Cincinnati because they had a sort of music entertainment paper there, a free one. And I sent some stuff there on spec and they published it and I did a few articles for them, but I wasn't really thinking about doing more than that. That didn't really happen until the early 90s in Seattle, when I was playing in bands and there was a very good free music paper there called The Rocket, which came out twice a month. I started sending them reviews of new CDs, and the editor there said, okay, these aren't quite good enough, but keep at it. And he sent me a couple of things to have me submit reviews. When he started publishing them, then he started having me do interviews and articles. And it just kind of grew from there. And within about 3 or 4 years, I was a senior writer there. Just freelance still, but I was publishing a lot. So, and I'd taken my clips, sent them off to other magazines, making them seem grander, and if I was publishing in more places than I really was. It's a bit of a con job, but getting taken on other magazines as well, and suddenly I'm doing all right with this. And a friend of mine had been offered a book, a quickie unauthorized bio that he didn't want to write, and said, would I be interested? And at that time, I just wanted to write more, I wanted to make a living from it. My son, it was about a year and a half before my son was born, but I was working for a newspaper, but in distribution. And there was a chance that a whole bunch of us were going to get laid off. So I said, okay, sure. So I ended up writing a quickie unauthorized biography of Mariah Carey that sold very well, maybe a fair bit of money. And I moved into doing that. And then we had a mortgage, we had a kid. So I was doing a lot of journalism and I was doing a lot of these books. I think there was 1 year that along with all the other writing, magazine writing, I researched and wrote 6 books. You have a month to research and write a 50,000 word book. And this was before the internet was the source of all information. So it involved going to libraries, using microfiche, old school research, really. So it became an interesting challenge, and I learned to parcel out my time. Okay, I need to write 2,000 words a day on this book, plus I have this article to do. From 2000, I was doing regular stuff for National Public Radio in the States as well, which is kind of like Radio 4, doing regular music reviews on one of their drive time shows. So I was working a lot and doing a fair bit of the childcare as well. So it was a balancing act. Tiring. But very lucrative, actually. So,
I mean, were you very disciplined, or did you just sort of muddle through it? Were you? So it was like all of these hours are blocked out for what I'm doing, and then I'm doing it. And
I'm still. I took very naturally to that self-discipline, and it's still there. I get up 4 o'clock in the morning, start work, and I have the set amount that I have to write each day on a book before I can go on to other projects. So that's just, to me, that's part of being a professional. No matter what kind of job you do.
So Are you someone who does a lot of hours? Like, do you work weekends, or are you kind of 9 to 5?
I work, well, I work fewer hours
Mm,
now because I'm just working on the fiction. But I do work 7 days a week,
mm,
365 days a year.
mm,
I like that steadiness.
mm,
I don't like to miss a day. I feel guilty if I do. Something that's probably worth adding is that my father was a writer.
mm.
At least for a while, he had a couple of television plays put on in the 70s.
Mm.
After he'd lost his job, he was a very good salesman. He lost his job because they basically thought in his 50s he was too old.
Right.
So he had these, but he never really continued with it past that. And
Mm,
in the 30s and the 40s, he'd been a jazz musician.
mm,
Had a jazz band that played around Leeds. And I never discovered the details of this, but at some point when he was in the Air Force, he ended up playing piano with Nat King Cole at a show.
mm,
I don't know how that happened because Nat King Cole's a good pianist himself.
mm.
But my father was supposed to have been exceptional. I never really got a chance to hear him.
Mm.
A far better musician than I could ever have been. But I think those music and writing genes just trickled
Yeah.
down to me.
Yeah.
He made more of being a musician than I did. I made more of a writer, been more successful as a writer than he was.
Mm.
So make of that what you will. I don't know.
Mm. Yeah. I worked at this conservatoire in London for a bit. I spoke to quite a few, a lot of the lecturers there were musicians and so on. And there's this quote that I'd heard, and I think it was attributed to Charlemagne, that, if to have another language is to have another soul. And I was discussing this idea in sort of like as music being another language,
Mhm.
that idea of music being the international language. I mean, what I want you to basically speak about here is kind of, what you think is the difference between sort of the expression through music and the expression through language, and sort of the relationship that you see with those.
I think music and language work on different levels.
Mm-hmm.
Music you can understand and appreciate, even if you don't necessarily speak the language.
Mm.
It can move you. Music is a far more emotional thing
Mm-hmm.
than language. Language can move you. The poetry of a language can move you, but it can only do that if you speak the language.
Yeah.
So music has the ability to communicate more widely. Language is only going to be able to communicate to those who know.
Yeah.
That's my take on it anyway.
Yeah. Okay. So, and then as you were speaking about, I mean, you've kind of touched on the amount of work you had to do for the books and,
Yeah.
the novels. What was that change in discipline like? Did you like that variety of having different things to focus on? And did you sort of mix that up quite evenly, or was one more hasslesome than the other? Do you prefer one over the other?
The novels tend to start as the quickie bios tailed off.
Mm.
The internet and the wider spread of the internet killed off the quickie bio.
Mm.
I mean, why would you want to buy a book that by the time it comes out is out of date when you can get the latest information and far more pictures online without spending anything? It's that's perfectly understandable.
Mm.
I missed the money, but I can't say I missed the writing.
Yeah.
I was still doing music journalism, and I was doing a lot of content writing as well. That being a thing for the internet for several years. I was a jobbing writer.
Mm.
I was a freelancer. I made my money how and where I could.
Mm.
But the novels started before I moved back to this country.
Mm-hmm.
I was still in Seattle when I started the first of these historical crime novels set in Leeds.
Mm.
And I asked my agent, who only worked with nonfiction, if she knew anybody who handled fiction. She put me on to an agent over here. I was coming over to visit my parents anyway, so when I was in London, I stopped off and talked to her. And she liked the writing, but said, "This isn't a book that can sell. Write me something else." So after I moved back here, that's exactly what I did. Long story, she didn't end up taking it, but a few years later, it was published by a small press. It's called The Broken Token, and got very, very good reviews. At that point, fiction was still just sort of a small little thing in the scheme of things, more content writing and journalism still, because that paid the bills. You got to go with that. And then the publisher said, right, what are you going to write next? Next. Hadn't even thought about that. Your focus is just on getting the first one.
I've got to do this first.
And at that point, there was a story in the Evening Post, I think it was, about a book that was found somewhere in town. And when they had a very old book, an antiquarian book, when they examined it, they found out the cover was made from human skin. And I'm thinking, there's a story here. And it became the second in the series set in the 1730s, which became one of the top 10 mysteries of the year for Library Journal.
Nice.
By which time my publisher had sold out to a slightly larger publisher who took me on, and I'm still with them more than 20 books down the line. So when that finished, since they initially signed me to a 2-book deal, it was a case of, okay, now I've got to write another one, get to that. And then I took off with other stuff, with smaller stuff with other publishers, and another series, yet another series with the same publisher. So I have now covered Leeds in pretty much from 1730s all the way up to the 1950s. And a lot of that is trying to get a handle on Leeds, what the place is, how it's developed. More than anything, what are the people like? Who are we? Not quite sure I succeeded on that. I'm not sure I ever will.
Has it just opened up more questions?
Part of the fun is trying. You know, it's and one of the joys of being able to write strong women. You know, because Northern women are strong. I think maybe the early Coronation Street with Ina Sharples and what have you had an effect, because those were very strong women. My mother was a strong woman. You know, it's they had to be. So being able to write strong women, it wasn't a case of, oh, I'm going to write strong women. A case of,
you have to.
This is a female character, and it just turns out that she's a strong woman. Nothing more complex than that.
So, take us through some of the research then, and like what was the kind of, at what point did you kind of get addicted to this project of kind of finding out what Leeds is and what Leeds is about?
Well, for a long time after I left Leeds, I didn't think much about the place. I mean, like a lot of people, when you're 18, you're just allowed to be out of there. But gradually, I was more interested in it. When I'd come back to see my parents in the 90s, and I'd pick up, suddenly there were books on Leeds history being published. There were not academic books. Started picking those up and taking them back to the States. Then eBay began. And I was able to pick up a lot of older books very cheap, except for the postage to get them sent over there. And I started developing more of an interest in it, learning a lot more about it. And also, when I was at school, there wasn't any social history. Which became far more of a thing, and I took to quite naturally. So I was interested in the lives of the ordinary people, not the rich and the titled. And that's who I began to write about, because these people deserve to be remembered. they're not. So if something I can do can make people think about them, then it's worthwhile.
Mm.
That and tell a good story as well. Because without a good story, people aren't going to read it. And that's what I've largely tried to do. It's at times I can be overtly political, but weave it in with the story. I have a book called Gods of Gold, which is set in 1890. And the backdrop is the Leeds gas strike. Essentially, the council tried to fire and rehire the gas workers at a lower wage. And you just think, hang on a minute, nothing's changed. Well, something has changed. Back then, the strikers won in 3 days.
Yeah.
Now, that's not going to happen. And I just thought, fine, this happened. Let's celebrate this. Let's let people know that it happened, that it is possible or was possible. And it had a real life character in there, a guy called Tom Maguire, who, Irish parents, he was ostensibly a photographer's assistant, but he educated himself about socialism. He became a union organizer. And he was one of the sort of people behind the foundation of the Independent Labour Party in the 1890s. However, he died in a room in Quarry Hill with no heat for the fire and no food in March of 1895, before he was 30 years old. There's a red plaque honoring him in the bus station. Supposedly, thousands lined the road to his funeral in Baker Street Cemetery. But how many people have ever heard of him now?
Yeah, exactly.
He's been lost, and he shouldn't be.
Yeah.
So he became a recurring character in several of these books. And his death was in one of them. So it's the politics and the history can become part of it. I have a book coming out in September, set in 1917. And the opening chapter is about the explosion of Barnbow. We heard about it for a little while on the centenary in end of 1916, and the end of 2016. The excellent play that Alice Nutter had of the Playhouse. But again, it's just kind of dropped out of sight. It just forms that opening segment to the book. And it's a case of, okay, this was here. 35 women died. And because of national security, their deaths were just listed as accidents. So again, you look at it like that, very little has changed. We're still covering up.
Yeah. Well, and a large part of it as well is because of that. I mean, the forgetfulness is kind of built into the media ecosystem of kind of, and next, and now this, and everything's devoid of context and nothing's connected to anything else. And here's the other thing. And here's the things we want you to think about and not other things that we want you to think about. So, yeah. I mean, it's, how lost have you got in it? I mean, does it take up all your time? Or just reading? Are you just reading stuff about Leeds, or do you kind of have to break it up with stuff?
Actually, I read a lot of fiction, and one of the things when you're doing a series is you reach a point actually where there's less research required. You research the period you're writing, the year or whatever that you're writing about, the events locally, nationally and internationally. But the characters, you have them down. All you're doing when you start writing those characters is you're sitting down with old friends.
Yeah.
These people are family to me. I love weaving the history in and out. The last novel in this that series featured a Leeds-born American gangster coming back to see his father. And there was a Leeds-born American gangster. As far as I know, he's never documented as ever having come back.
It was a Madden, wasn't it?
Yeah, Owen Madden.
Yeah.
And he owned the Cotton Club.
Mm.
He was actually a gangster who survived to die of old age,
Mm.
which was quite a rarity. And in New York, when he was late teens, right around 20,
Mm.
outside a dance hall, he was shot about a dozen times and left for dead. But he lived
Mm.
and took revenge.
Mm.
So maybe he was pretty much indestructible. I don't know. His nickname was Killer,
Mm.
and evidently he earned it. So
Mm.
lived appropriately in a place called Hell's Kitchen.
Yeah. I mean, there was, I mean, I don't know. Obviously, I've not done the research to anywhere near the level of you, but sort of seeing those sort of history books that you mentioned, you know, like Crime in Leeds and Yorkshire Punishments and things like that, you see a lot of quite brutal crimes and stuff. But some of that is, you know, that's from the, I want to say degradation, but that's not the word that I mean. Sort of the state of what they had to live in and what was available
Yeah,
to them.
yeah.
Yeah.
I have a series set in the 1820s. The main character is a thief taker, which was in a way, a sort of proto-private detective, but also as close as you could really like to get to police force before we had a police force. Police didn't start here until the late 1830s. He could get your stuff back if it had been stolen. It was up to you then if you wanted to prosecute the people who did it, but you had to pay for the prosecution. And a lot of crimes which were on the statute books could get you either hung or transported to Australia. That was the brutal nature of things. But he works on recovering stuff for people. He has a young woman who works with him called Jane, who had been a street kid. Kicked out of the house when she was 8 because her father raped her, and her mother decided she'd rather have a wage earner in the house than a child. And she survived on the street. She can follow anyone. She can be invisible. And her upbringing has made her deadly. The catalyst for this book is the death of 2 factory children because the overseers were brutal. They just wanted to keep up production. Human beings were a very expendable commodity then.
And there was no regulation.
No, there wasn't. You have these kids working 12 hours a day, 6 days a week, maybe 14 hours a day, 6 years old. What you're doing now. And Wester himself had been grown up in the workhouse. He'd been brutalized in a factory. When he's told about the deaths of these kids, he decides it's time for some justice. And he does get it. And it's a violent book, but there were violent times. And that kind of restitution demands it. I don't think it's violent just for the sake of it. I don't do that. But I think it makes its point well.
Have you looked at sort of pre-industrial stuff then, or have you just how's that changed from what you've researched?
Well, industrial really only starts in the 1770s.
I mean, did it get more? Was it the industrialization that brought the brutality? You know, the sort of that process of enclosures
on a large scale, because it was a combination of things. You have people coming to the cities looking for work because the factories were here, there were jobs here. And also the people in the country under the Enclosure Acts, suddenly the large landowners had taken their livings away from them. And that often meant their homes as well. They had no choice. And what you will find is the streets were not paved with gold.
Paved with suds and shit.
Pretty much. The air in Leeds was hugely polluted. Even in the 1820s, there was a permanent pall of smoke over the town. And the factories were eager for cheap labor. One of the things that that kind of shocked me when I was researching this. And I do a sort of performance piece about all this, mix of testaments to commissions along with extracts from my novel, is they brought workhouse orphans from down in London up to the north to work in factories. They kept them shackled. They were locked up when they were not working. You tell me the difference between that and slavery, because I'm damned if I know what it is. And the punishments that were meted out were just often purely sadistic. So those were the times. The factory owners, and they were the ones with the money and the power, wanted results. The overseers had to get them, or they didn't have a job. So that was the system, for better or worse. And it did change gradually, and the factory owners didn't want it to change. And the things that were prevalent back then, scurvy, rickets, malnutrition. Where have we come across those lately? You know, we're heading back. We're heading in the wrong direction.
Yeah.
And that's the point I was trying to make.
Full pelts as well.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And truly abysmal housing. You know, what we have now is better, but the bad housing we have is pitiful. So that's the point I'm constantly trying to make. Things change, but they don't.
The things that are changed there, you know, like back to, I suppose, historiography, like this idea, you know, the sort of great men of history kind of role, and then the sort of more modern social history. I mean, the reality of the changes that were made, the civilizing changes that were made, is that they were made through people, through the workers and organized working people, and the church to a degree, you know, plus and minusly.
Yeah, I mean, how long would it have taken women to get the vote if they hadn't protested for it?
Yeah, it would never have happened.
I think it would have happened eventually, but God only knows when. You know, the men in power did not want to cede any of that power. Those in power now do not want to cede any of that power. That's why you have politicians saying it's right to jeer at people taking the knee. People shouldn't boo the national anthem, you know, things like that, and trying to curb the power of unions. Christ, if it wasn't for unions, we wouldn't even have weekends. So it's a constant battle, I think.
Yeah. And it's sort of that information, like we're all kind of doused in information, but it's mostly noise and not much signal. Yeah.
Go back a couple of 100 years. Not many working people could afford newspapers and magazines. And those who sold them risked being prosecuted for sedition and papers not paying tax on papers and stuff like that. You will find newspapers pasted up above the on the chimney breast in public houses and elsewhere for people to read. You had the glee clubs where men would join together to sing, also plot politically. Bear in mind, trying to start a combination, which was the early form of the union, could get you transported. Or puzzle martyrs. You know, it's ordinary people have had to fight for everything that they have. And I think that's been forgotten or quietly swept under the carpet.
Well, it's always presented as, you know, being graciously, you know, gifted to us. And it's not the case. It's like, you know, there's always someone, oh, this person they were really great and they did this, that, or the other thing that then it's like, no, there was loads of people that were a movement that put pressure, and that was the person that wrote a law about it. But they had no intention of doing that if it wasn't for the political pressure behind.
Yeah. In 1832, after the Great Reform Act in Parliament, initially, it didn't say that women did not have the vote. When women tried to vote, they suddenly thought, oh shit, and hastily changed it. But a woman from Yorkshire, who quite possibly is from Leeds, difficult to trace with a name called Mary Smith, wrote to Parliament in 1832 about women having the vote. And a member of Parliament read it out, and they all started jeering. It gladdens my heart to know that a woman from Yorkshire was one of the first to bring it up. But I was involved in an exhibition back in 2018 called The Vote Before the Vote, held in Leeds, and it was celebrating the Victorian women who worked towards the franchise. And there were quite a few of them. And the exhibition stops in 1903 with the formation of the suffragettes, because it became a whole different thing and became more of a national rather than in the different regions. But there were an awful lot of women here who did a lot of work.
Yeah.
It was wonderful to have a hand in making that more public.
Yeah, sort of uncovering those stories, and just that they've always been there, and they just need to be sort of brought to life and spread around.
Yeah, the person who did all the heavy lifting was an excellent suffragist historian called Vine Pemberton Joss, and I just sort of helped. But I think I'm probably more proud of that than anything else I've been involved in. And writing as fiction has led to me being involved in a lot more things than I ever imagined.
Yeah. So say you're making up stories, it's kind of, it's taken you in lots of different interesting directions. Just because it's had to, because it's like, well, I need information for this story. And then, like with any research, you're kind of like, oh, well, I know all this stuff about this thing now. How do I use that? How do I get this in? Yeah. My
Victorian Edwardian series, the main character marries a woman who is the landlady of the Victoria Public House at the bottom of Bradley Road, which was a real place. And so I learned a lot about sheepskin. My great-grandparents ran the place for 20 years, in fact, from the 1920s to the 1940s. So I kind of had a vested interest as well. And doing family research, my family was basically around Cross Green, Sheepscare. Those were the two main places.
Yeah.
Nobody had written a history of Sheepscare, to my amazement.
Yeah.
So right before lockdown, I'd just become the writer in residence at Abbey House Museum. And we're still not sure quite what that means, even after all this time.
Yeah, it sounds very cool, though. It's
yeah, it's great. I love it. But I'd started researching sheepskin. And I was over there, and they went through their catalogue, what they had on sheepskin. And an invoice came up and said, would it be possible to see that? Took it out, photocopied it for me. It's from 1858, an invoice from a painter and decorator with premises in Rockley Court Yard in town, just off the hedgerow, and also at 31 Meanwood Road. He was my 3 times great uncle. And there's a signature on it that looked just so much like my father's signature. And suddenly history becomes very, very personal.
Yeah.
And much like when we were over at St Hilda's Church in Cross Green, Heritage Open Days a few years ago, I wandered into the back room. They had the honours board from St Hilda's Church of England School, scholarships. And I'm looking at 1925 or 26. My father's name is there. And it's one of those quite literally jaw-dropping moments. I've researched my family history quite a bit. I started out in a place called, we started out in York, evidently, it seems in the 1500s, and then to Westow, a small little place in East Yorkshire, not far from Malton. And the man who brought the Nicksons to Leeds was a guy called Isaac Nickson, who was a butcher and innkeeper from Malton. who became a butcher on Timble Bridge, which no longer exists,
Mm.
in Leeds. They crossed over Timble Beck, otherwise known as Sheepscot Beck.
Right, yeah.
Just down across from the, Leeds Minster as it is now, going towards Marsh Lane.
Yeah.
So for the last 200 years, my family history is in Leeds.
Mm.
And maybe I'm wrong, but I feel this is why I can write about it, because I feel it in my bones. It's in my DNA. At this point, anyway. My mother's family goes back a long time in Leeds, and so it just seems to be me.
Yeah.
I feel I understand Leeds.
Yeah.
At least on some level.
Yeah.
I can look at a picture taken somewhere in Leeds, and there's a very good chance to be able to place exactly where it is.
Yes. Yeah.
I have that kind of memory for the place.
Yeah.
For better or worse, probably for worse.
Okay. So I'm going to try and power through some questions now.
Okay.
And I'm sure we'll come back to some of these things. So I think I wanted to start off with, I'll go climate change first, and then.
Okay.
So
I'm going to be sort of moving as I do this, so I can make another cup of tea.
Oh, no worries.
So ask away anyway.
Yeah. So the question, I use climate change as like representing all of the kind of ecological issues. But the question's to see whether you can do anything in your work, or whether the information about that kind of thing is affecting your work and how you work. So can you do anything within your work to adapt to or mitigate, or I suppose even raise awareness of climate change? And is it something that's on your radar, or is it something that you're not bothered about, or like what's your work relationship to it?
It's very much a concern. I think probably for a lot of people, there's certainly anyone who has kids. I suppose in some ways it's there because in my work, because all I can really do when you're writing historical crime and nothing, my most recent setting is 1957. All I can really do is highlight the increase in soot and smog and dirt in Leeds. And 57, you just had the Clean Air Act, and it hadn't largely taken effect yet. So that's, my characters are concerned with getting by. And also back then, while some were concerned with the pollution, those voices were very few and far between, and not in any way that can figure into what I'm writing. So it's not an issue I've touched on directly, because I'd just be trying to shoehorn it in, and it wouldn't work.
I mean, I think that's a good point about, you're talking about the level of the air quality there, that, that it's so obvious that it needs to actually feature in the narrative.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But that's about as far as I can take it, without feeling like I'm getting up on a soapbox. And that doesn't work when you're telling a story.
No. Yeah. It has to come out of the drama rather than be pushed into. Yeah. I mean, I would say, obviously, you're doing, you're politically, you're doing place-based politics and telling the history of the city and those sort of, you're thinking local and acting global in writing. You're quite low impact in terms of your work, I would imagine. I would imagine you don't have to do a big travel to work. So
no, unless you count coming downstairs.
Yeah, and that doesn't use any carbon, I don't think.
No, probably not.
Unless you're streaming something or doing something.
We're aware.
Yeah.
And we do what we can.
Yeah.
That's probably not enough, but we do what we can.
Yeah. I haven't really touched on your relationship with the sort of business side, I mean, we've talked about, your work-life balance kind of stuff, but in terms of that, actually engaging with the market, so editors, publishers, yeah, I mean, we've mentioned them, but sort of that side of the work, like what's that like, and what kind of relationship do you have, and do you have any leverage with them, or is the relationship kind of biased one way in their favor of what's it like?
Well, I have an agent. I have a reasonable relationship with my editor at the publisher, and the actual copy editing is farmed out to a woman who was my original publisher and is also a friend, knows my books and understands how I work, and someone I trust a great deal.
Mm.
So all that is fine.
Mm.
I think inevitably, if you're a writer, unless you're a big self-writer,
Mm.
the scale is tipped towards the publisher.
Mm.
It's just the nature of things.
Yeah.
The average writer does not have a lot of power.
Mm.
And maybe the whole idea of self-publishing has changed that a bit.
Mm.
But quite honestly, in most cases, self-publishing does not get you into libraries.
Mm.
It does not get you into bookshops.
Mm.
Not all, but that's in most cases. The places where a wider range of readers are going to discover what you have.
Mm.
So that means you've got to work within the traditional market, which leaves the options limited for a writer.
Mm.
So far, since getting published, I haven't had a problem.
Mm.
Has
that got easier through practice, or has that got easier through sort of validation, credibility, like the fact that you've published books and sold books and they know how to sell your book, and so now you've built a working relationship where it's working for everybody now?
Yeah, but there's still always that pressure. If those sales slip, you're out of there.
Yeah.
That's business. And having been in the music business as well, even just as a journalist, that's commonplace there.
Mm.
So it's, nothing is guaranteed. There are no jobs for life.
Mm. If you could change any 3 things about your work, what would you change? So you've got like carte blanche, so you don't have to worry about budget or anything, or you can be as realistic or unrealistic as you want.
My books come out in hardback, primarily. And hardbacks, unless it's someone known, is a tough sell in a bookshop. Mm-hmm. So I would have my books come out more in mass market paper where they can get into bookshops as well as libraries. After that, stand on their own merit. I would like to have a marketing budget, apart from what I put in myself. Mm-hmm. And maybe a marketing staff at a publisher that could pursue this. Mm-hmm. Those are probably my 3 things.
Nice. Yeah. People normally take a lot longer on that.
It's it might seem relatively small, but it can make a big difference.
Yeah, and you're speaking from experience as well as, it's like, well, I've been doing this long enough now. It's like, right, I need this, this, and this, and that would make everything so much better.
Yeah. It's not going to make me into a best-selling writer.
Yeah.
That's fine. I don't need to be a best-selling writer. I write the best books I can.
Yeah.
I just like more people to be able to read them.
If there was a UBI, do you think it would affect your work? Or, I mean, you can view this historically as well, like how that might have changed your career or your career trajectory. I mean, if there was a universal basic income, the question normally is, would you still work? And if you would still work, do you think you'd still be doing the same sort of work?
Well, I'm old enough now that I get a pension. Mm-hmm. So in a manner of speaking, I have a UBI. Mm-hmm. I still write every day. Mm-hmm. So that answers part of the question for you. Mm-hmm. But there were times in the last 15 years when it was tough, and a UBI the cushion of a UBI would have made a huge difference to life stress. Mm. So I would still work, always going to work, because I don't know what the hell else I would do otherwise. It's in me, it has to come out. But having that cushion of income makes a huge change. It's not exaggeration called life change. So I think a UBI would be life changing for everybody, especially the people on 0 hours contracts, especially the people trying to survive on the universal credit when it's being cut and when all the costs are skyrocketing.
And it doesn't go anywhere anyway.
No, completely. And, it's all out of their control. Having that cushion of money makes you feel like you do have some power in it. And that's an important thing. It gives you more self-respect in a way.
Well, it takes the pressure off as well. Like, have you seen the thing where I think the study was a study with Indian farmers, and they did this sort of dry season, wet season comparison with IQ tests. And yes, we know all the things that are wrong with IQ tests, but basically they were showing a drop of like when there was no work and there was like, a decrease in the amount of food available and so on. There's an IQ drop because there's more pressure. So more of your brain is taken up with like, how do I pay for this? And how do I do that? And, horizons shrink and things like that. So
loss of sleep, things like that. Yeah, no, absolutely. Just to have those worries gone can be a huge difference to the way you approach life.
Oh yeah. Totally change your priorities and perspectives. I want to reanalyze that now through the lens of, the sort of struggling artist, romantic lens. I mean, you must have been telling yourself that to some degree when you started going freelance and writing and just, leaving the hospital work, the reliable salaried work, and going into sort of, I'm just going to, there must have been a part of you of just, I need to go through this to get to the success. Like, do you think that's necessary as an artist to have that struggle and to have that experience of not having the access to the resources that you need and having to be creative? And maybe is that something that's just for single people at a particular time?
Well, I was married, so
yeah.
And my wife had been laid off from her job. She was working part-time, and she'd gone back to school to get a horticultural certificate. I thought I was going to be losing my job, which was a decent job in newspaper distribution. Suddenly, I was writing and publishing, but there were limits to how much I could do when I was working full-time. The catalyst was getting offered the chance to do this book. We discussed it and decided to take the big leap of faith. It paid off, but there's no guarantee of it. So, and it was tough. That first year was pretty tough. I was working my ass off. For the next 8 years, I was averaging 70 to 80 hours a week.
It's a lot.
Yeah. And juggling many things, because that's what you had to do.
I mean, were you passionate about it at the time? Was it?
God, yeah. Are you kidding? I'd always wanted to write. This is the chance for me to do something I've always wanted to do and be paid for it. So, yeah, I was passionate about it. And even if the first book with my name on it that I held was about an unauthorized biography of Mariah Carey, it was still my book. It was my work. Not as much of a thrill as the first novel. My father was hugely proud that I had published a book. And I published plenty more while he was still alive. But both my parents died before my first novel came out. And I wish they'd had a chance to see it. That is how things work out.
So Next question is, we'll do Brexit. I don't know how much this will have even registered for you other than, I suppose, non-work ways. So the question is basically, has it changed your work? Have you seen any noticeable difference in the way that you work now that we have Brexited?
Honestly, no, it makes no difference to my work at all.
Yeah.
In terms of my work, I live in the past. I live in
you live in a pre-EU world.
I was going to say I live in a pretty common market era, so it's had nothing. I don't even think of it when it comes to my work.
You're not, I guess you're working on the latest software. Do you just write in Word, or do you have like software?
I write with Word.
Yeah.
When I started out as a writer, I was using WordPerfect. When I started out, when I started out, I had a 286 and was using the operating system was DOS. So I didn't even have Windows 3.1 at that time. But yeah, it was interesting. And I had a dot matrix printer.
Well, massive one.
Not massive.
No. They make a good sound.
Yeah, and you get all the pleasure of tearing those strips off the side. But no, I'd written a number of novels even before I became a freelance writer, all happily unpublished. But those were all on typewriters, and I'm so glad to be working on computers.
Did you have to do that for yourself? Was it like, I'm not a proper writer unless I do it on the typewriter?
Oh, no, this was pre-computer era.
Oh, okay. Right. Yeah. So it wasn't being a purist or anything.
No, it was 93.
Yeah.
Got the first computer.
Yeah.
Which is still relatively early.
Yeah.
And it was a used computer and printer that cost $750, which was a fair amount at that time. Turned out to be a really good investment.
So the question around social media is how much it's seeped into your work, how much of your working time you have to spend on social media. And, if you have to do any of that for your work, how much time it takes up and how much sort of return on investment of that time you see. Do you feel like it's time well spent?
Well, I use Facebook and Twitter. How much time? I don't know, because not that much on Facebook these days. Facebook is a great hub for keeping in touch with people who are friends who are spread around the globe. And I have a writer page on there as well that I do post on, but often updates. I do blog every couple of weeks, mostly Leeds and history related. Twitter I use more because it's for the social interaction. But it has proved to be useful in people coming to me saying, would I like to talk to library group, book club, whatever. So work-wise, it does give a return on investment. I don't think of it that way. I just think of it as a way of chatting with people. The short format of it is suitable. I'm not a fan of the word banter, but it's very good for that with people. Joking around a bit and stuff like that. And, also, you can keep up with news better on social media than you often can on the news sites. That said, God knows I'm glad Trump is no longer on Twitter.
Yes. I mean, it's just nice not to see some things sometimes, isn't it?
Yeah.
And have a break from something.
As this is evidently signed an exclusive contract with his Truth Social. In theory, at least, he shouldn't be coming back. We'll see.
Yes.
We'll live in hope anyway.
And then I'm going to ask you to do the self-promotion thing. So where can people find you? What should they be buying? What books should they start with? Where can they get your books?
My books are available in lots of public libraries,
Mm-hmm.
which is a good way to get them without spending any cash.
Mm-hmm.
And you really should use the resource of libraries, because if you don't, this fucking government's going to close them down.
Yeah, yeah.
However, if you do want to splash the cash, there are independent bookshops who will be happy to order in my novels. Or, of course, there are various online places. Speedy Hen is good, has the cheapest prices, and far cheaper than the big competitor that's named after a river in the South America.
Mm.
And they have free postage.
Mm.
So I would really recommend them. Mm-hmm. What should you buy? Well, I have my most recent novel is called The Blood Covenant. Mm-hmm. And that's about a thief taker trying to bring justice to some people whose kids have been killed. If you want to go all the way back to the 1730s, start with The Broken Token and the story of Richard Nottingham, Constable of Leeds, and his family. However, if something Victorian Edwardian appeals to you, Tom Harper series is possibly a good one. And if you want a very strong woman, the sixth in that series, The Tin God, features his wife running to become a poor law guardian.
So what would that be? Just looking after, members of the poor, sort of becoming like a social...
Well, no, the in charge, looking after conditions in the workhouse. Back when what's now the Thackeray was the workhouse. Before it became Eastleigh Hospital, before it became the geriatric unit of Jimmy's, and I worked there for a little while. But women were, the way the law changed in 1894, women were able to stand for some local public offices. And all ratepayers had the vote in local elections. All classes, all genders. That's something a lot of people don't know. Women did have a vote prior to 1918, just not a national vote. And they could stand for some offices. So, and of course, there were men who really didn't want women getting above their station. Yeah, that's at the heart of this book. So it's one that's very close to my heart. And Annabelle is, well, my partner said, "You're kind of in love with Annabelle, aren't you?" I'm like, well, yeah, maybe a bit. So you can read more about Annabelle as well, and their daughter Mary.
Excellent.
Who goes on to become a suffragette when she is older. I have a couple of books set in the 20s and the 40s about a policewoman in Leeds, and two Denmark novels, 1950s Leeds noir, and then the Crooked Spire series, which is about to become a murder mystery musical in a theatre not close to you, set in 1360s Chesterfield. So you've got your choices. All you have to do is pick one. Actually, pick several.
Yeah.
Why not?
Buy them all. Buy them all now.
Yeah.
Mindless commercialism as well. So, yeah, thank you very much for doing this, Chris. It's been
Thank you very much for asking me.
Thank you again to Chris for being my guest. Thanks again to all my guests. And thanks to you, Leeds, for being my subject. And of course, most of all, thank you to you, my dear listener. Come back on July 11th to hear me speak to someone else. I haven't decided who yet, but I need to take some time out from having to temp full time and keep the podcast going in this awful failing economy. In terms of the show's current support, thanks again to the recent generosity of one of our American listeners. Thank you, Stanley. Sorry the episode is late, and I will reply to your email soon. It's been a week. And thanks to my 5 current Patreons. But this show isn't making any other returns yet. Both the donation and the 6 Patreons, all of whom have joined this year, signal to me that Working Hours is viable. There is an audience that's willing to pay to hear a show about a place called Leeds, a time called now, and an activity called work. But donations and Patreon supporters need to be scaled up to make this project viable. This year's going well for the pod, but it needs to level up, don't we all? And to make Working Hours work, I need more listeners, and to get more listeners, I need more guests, and to get more guests, I need to reach more people. I'm exhausted with social media for the moment, so please Want your help? I need to increase my Patreon memberships tenfold at a minimum just to keep this show going. It's a lot, but it's doable, and I need to do that soon. So pretty fucking please with sugar on, please help. If you're listening to this and you aren't signed up to my Patreon, then please go to join the Patreon as soon as possible. Or make a podcast and give me something that I would want to work on. If you have listened to 5 or more episodes of Working Hours, please give me a busker's worth and throw in a one-off donation of £3 or more via Ko-fi. Awesome Patreons, please tell your friends about this show and get them to listen to it. Get them to come on the show. Send your favourite 3 episodes to 3 people each who you think would get a kick out of them or who you think should be a guest on the show. Literally any sort of support anyone can give at all will help me to go some way towards keeping the podcast free for anyone and everyone who isn't digitally excluded in Leeds or anywhere else to listen. And even more importantly, it will help me to keep making it. The more you do, the more the podcast can do. Okay, that's me. Cheers, ears. Take care out there and be kind to each other, Leeds. If you're listening to this, I assume you have some connection to Leeds, like living here or being from here. If you're such a person in Leeds or from Leeds and you haven't done your recording for Working Hours yet, then don't wait. Email me now, right now. Quick, get a pen. workinghourspod@western-studios.com. If you fancy being my guest, put guest in the subject line of your email and add a short bio in the message. Stick in some suggestions of your availability and I'll send you a release form and a Zoom invite. If you'd like to be on Working Hours, I will need a 2-hour window for us to record in. I can record in your work time or during your downtime. I have been recording interviews for Working Hours for over a year on Zoom, but I can also record offline. You can appear on Working Hours anonymously, or you can promote yourself and or your company or brand. Cleaner or owner, what is your experience? How do you feel about work? What do you like and not like? What do you do, Leeds? Be a part of local history, have your voice heard, share your wisdom, give us the inside skinny. This is your show, Leeds, and it's all about what you make of yourself. Do you know what you're doing? If you do, then come and tell me all about it. Come on Working Hours, even if you don't know what you're doing. I certainly don't. Email me right now. Quick, get a pen. workinghourspod@western-studios.com. If you're allowed to do that, that is. If you're not allowed to do that, then tell me why. If you and your business aren't ashamed of what you do, then let's hear all about it. What good are you doing the rest of us? Are you socially useful? Am I? Is this? Send your feedback, questions, comments, and queries right now to workinghourspod@western-studios.com. What is happening, Leeds? Find out by following this show on Twitter @WorkingHours3 and on Instagram @WorkingHoursPodLeeds to find out when new episodes are going to be released. Or just use the hashtag #WorkingHoursPodLeeds on either of those sites to find me. I'm on Facebook, facebook.com/Western_Studios_Leeds. I'm also on LinkedIn, linkedin.com/IN/Simon-Treen. Treen is TREEN. Or you can go to my company page, which is linkedin.com/company/Western-Studios. If you want to make a podcast in Leeds, whether it's for a cause, a publicity campaign, a product promotion, or your own passion project, then get in touch with me. Western Studios for support, advice, and guidance on anything podcasts. At Western Studios, you work with a real-life lawyer who is actually in Leeds, who you can actually work with on making podcast content. So don't wade through articles and videos and podcasts about how to make podcasts. Just get on with it. Western Studios can make your podcast with you or even for you. Western Studios can take on your podcast's boring, time-consuming, and painful admin, recording, editing, transcription, whatever. Tell me about it. I feel your pain. For a charge, I'll share it. Writers, what are you doing with your lives? Hopefully you're writing. Well, I know there are listeners out there who want to hear great original writing performed as audio content and made in Leeds. How do I know this? Because I'm one of them. Help me make Muck for Brass, a series of short stories, poems, performers, whatever, all published as podcast content. Is your work arty, salacious, pulpy, strange? Good. I want to make it a podcast. I get practice making the show, and you get a finished, performed, and published version of your writing. Businesses, Campaigns, brands, got an inkling that you'd like a podcast but don't know where to start? Hit me up at makemypodcast at western-studios.com and we'll start making your podcast straight away. The first hour of arranged consultation and pre-production time is free. So what do you have to lose? And what are you waiting for? Save yourself the hassle and the headache and make your podcast with a Leeds-based, in real life podcast producer. That's me, Western Studios Leeds. Once again, please let Working Hours get big and strong by joining its Patreon. Support Working Hours by becoming a champion on Patreon for £1 a month. You can inspire me and motivate me with a membership and maybe one day even be helping to cover all my costs. You can chat to me there and see me do a monthly live stream where, again, you can chat to me all about the show and, God, do I need to find someone to actively share this project with? Go to patreon.com/workinghourspod right now and sign up, please. And or go to Ko-fi, that's ko-fi.com/working hours and join me there for £1 a month and get access to the Working Hours Discord and chat to me there. I will be putting up additional material on Ko-fi once there are any members there. Please do remember to like, share, follow, and subscribe to this show. Every little bit helps. Tell your gran, tell your housekeeper, tell your gardener, tell your parole officer, tell your boss, tell Leeds, and I'll see thee next time, our kid. Working Hours is presented, edited, and recorded by Simon Treem for Western Studios Leeds Limited. The music was The Bees from Chopin's Etudes, which is in the public domain and was taken from museopen.org.